Our fireside chat will be between two experienced and talented leaders. Our moderator is Professor Kiichi Fujiwara, the director of the Institute for Future Initiatives and a professor in the graduate schools of law and politics. Professor Fujiwara has an education steeped in U.S.-Japan collaboration. He is a graduate of the University of Tokyo and also studied as a Fulbright student at Yale University. In addition to his role as an esteemed educator of the next generation, Professor Fujiwara is known for his many books on the politics of peace and war. He also writes a monthly column about international affairs for the Asahi Shimbun and a weekly film review for the Mainichi Shimbun. Our guest speaker is Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, Mr. Keith Krach. Undersecretary Krach took the oath of office June 21st, 2019, and that very day, he joined Secretary of State Pompeo on an overseas trip to begin advancing U.S. economic interests. Within his first week on the job, he was here in Japan with President Trump to participate in the G20 Leaders Summit in Osaka. Undersecretary Krach joined government from the private sector, where he was the CEO and chairman of electronic signature and digital transaction management company DocuSign, the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Ariba, the COO of Rasna Corporation, and the youngest ever vice president of General Motors. He led General Motors' formation of the country's first Japanese joint venture, GMF Robotics. This led to one of the world's largest robotics companies today. Undersecretary Krach earned a degree in engineering from Purdue University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Please join me in a round of applause to kick off our fireside chat.
Konbanwa. Well, now, this is such a wonderful occasion to have the Undersecretary of State of the United States to our University of Tokyo campus. This is such a great honor, and I very much thank you for taking your time to visit our campus. This is a public forum, so this is open to the public. And after our Fireside chat without fire, we'll open up for a brief Q&A session. So be prepared. Now, there's so many things to ask you, actually, Mr. Krach. But the one thing that really is striking is how close you've been to Japan in your business career. Not only were you engaged in several business transactions with Japan, you have a tremendous network of friends in Japan. So you have your Japan experience. And you're back here for the second time after taking your office as an Undersecretary of State. So tell me about your Japan experiences as a business person. Just remember that many people here are from the business sector.
Well, first of all, Professor, it's a great honor to be back in Japan, and a great honor to be at Tokyo University, one that develops next generation transformational leaders. I mean, well, my love affair with Japan began right after I graduated from business school, and I grabbed a couple of my classmates, and we said, let's go to Japan. And that was back in 1981. And we just traveled everywhere. It was great. And then at General Motors, I actually proposed that we do a joint venture in the robotics area. That's when it was first beginning, back in around 1981. And the board said, okay, let's do it. And they said, how should we do it? I go, can I come back next month? And I'll tell you that. And so we found a company called Fanuc. And I said, it's Fanuc, they're the world's leader in NC controllers, which is the brains of the robots. They have a wide product line. We have some real sophisticated technology. Let's do a joint venture. So I called up Dr. Inaba, who was the CEO, and I said, hey, can you be here in 2 days? And he was with his whole team. And we did a 50-50 joint venture. It's now the largest manufacturer of industrial robots in the world. And that was a great experience because being, running that joint venture, I was probably coming to Japan half the time. So that was great. And then at RASNA, we did another joint venture with Kubota. And they were a great partner. And, all along the way, you're just making friends and just feeling at home. And then at Ariba, I've got Watanabe-san, who was CEO of Ariba, Nippon Ariba, and a great friend who also then was on the DocuSign advisory board. And at Ariba, we did a partnership with SoftBank, IBM, NEC, Fujitsu. I mean, really most of the high-tech companies. So it was just really great. After getting sworn in and making it in time for the G20 in Osaka. And it was funny because they had like a reception, and I'm with, the U.S. Embassy, and they go, this is a CEO reception. And so, like, all of a sudden, Soji-san, who's the CEO of NTT Communications, also on our advisory board at DocuSign, he goes, Krach-san, what are you doing here? I go, I work for the United States government right now. And he just he literally fell on the ground. He was laughing. I go, no, I'm serious. Here's my business card. Tell him, But anyway, it's great to be back because when I think of now running economic diplomacy for the United States, I think of Japan. We couldn't have a better ally, partner, or friend. And when I mean that, on a trusted, really the definition of trust. So it's great to be here.
Well, your words are music, really, to our ears. Fanuc, Fujitsu, Kubota, all these are well-recognized names in our business sector, and you've been working with the leading companies in our land. And you were appointed as the vice president of the General Motors at the age of 26. I wasn't even born then. So how did you manage? Well, you have such a colorful and illustrative, wonderful career in the business sector. You've achieved so much, and yet you accepted a public office. There must be a reason for that. Why did you say yes? What was the reason? Why do you want to work with the government?
Well, I think to me it's pretty simple. I grew up in middle of a small town in Ohio. My dad had a 5-person machine shop in good times. It was just him and me in the bad times. Welded at the age of 12, and I never thought I was be able to do the things that I got a chance to do. And so when I was asked, it was like, this is a dream I never knew I had. I'd be honored. He said, can you move? I go, I can move anywhere in the world because I've had that blessing of the American dream. So to pay back a great nation that's done so much for my family and me, and to pay it forward to the next generation. So it's probably the only decision I didn't consult my wife on because I just made it right on the spot. But I couldn't have a better partner. Yeah.
Very noble thing for you to do. But having said that, I want to push you a bit further. With your background in business activities, there must have been things that led you to think that the government can do better, that the U.S. government can do this, but it's not doing that. some particular policy areas, priorities that you thought is not really emphasized in U.S. governmental policy. Could you point out some of the areas that you think the U.S. government could have done better and that you want to do better in your own position right now?
Sure. I think one of the things is, when you go and get in front of the Senate and you got to be confirmed and they ask you all these questions, you're tested in front of a live audience, they hand you 4 notebooks, committed to memory. It'll be institutionalized forever and your family will be sitting behind you. That's motivation. And when I'm reading that, I'm seeing all these different policies and tactics and all that, strategies. I mean, brilliant stuff. But what I didn't see was an overall plan in terms of integrating it. And I would say that would be that's a big thing, right? That as a businessman, you have a playbook and we did it in all the companies we built: vision, mission, values, team rules, long-term goals, strategy, all boiled down to execution. And what I saw was there's a big gap between policy and execution. So that would be one. The other one is leveraging the private sector. Because I think CEOs in the U.S. and Japan, they want to help their country, and they're patriotic. And as long as it doesn't conflict with their fiduciary duty of their shareholders, and this is what I tell the folks at the State Department: if you ask them for a favor, they'll do it. They'd love to. It's a way for them to serve. And I think one of the other things is amplify a great set of trust values that we have when it comes to, and I think of the relationship between the United States and Japan. Integrity, accountability, honesty, transparency, respect. Respect for things like rule of law, respect for property of all kinds, respect for sovereignty of the nation, and also, respect for freedom, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. So anyway, I think those are some of the things that I've seen. Now, I've seen a lot of things that have been absolutely blown my mind. And so the guys in Silicon Valley, they'll go, "Hey, what's it like working in Washington?" And I go, "Not like you guys think." I go, "The career foreign service officers, the civil servants, I'll tell you, these guys, they're the smartest people I know. They speak 3 to 7 languages. They go get their master's at Georgetown, foreign policy. If they're lucky, they get to come to University of Tokyo. These guys are smart. And by the way, they work hard. They make you guys look lazy. They're mission driven. They're 7x24. They have to rotate every 3 years to a different country. They have to take a dangerous assignment, and they make a small fraction of what they could make in the private sector." And I said, just like when you see a military officer or a military person who served in the military, you thank them for their service. I go, if you ever run across these great civil servants, these great foreign service officers, thank them for their service. And that's like a big aha. That's probably the biggest aha.
Now, your job title is Under Secretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and Environment. And I'm asking this question not because some people may not be aware of Under Secretary of State. I'm asking this question because I don't understand what an Under Secretary of State does. So, what do you do in office? What are the job obligations, opportunities, things you do in your office? What does an Under Secretary of State do?
Yeah, my mom says, "Hey, Keith, now that you're a big shot now, can't you give yourself a simpler title?" And by the way, the federal government, they call me the E. So I go, "Mom, if anybody asks you, it stands for excellence." So if you look at what my role is, I would classify it this way. It is optimized economic growth. It's really an optimization equation, right? Enhance economic growth, enhance economic security, and the health of the planet to maximize global economic security and advance peace and prosperity for citizens of the world. That's really it, in essence. And it's a great honor to lead economic diplomacy for the U.S. And so after I got back from Osaka, I sat down with Secretary of State Pompeo, and he goes, here's my charge to you. I want you to develop and operationalize a global economic security strategy that advances peace and prosperity in the world. And I go, I got it, sir. And we began.
Tell us a bit more about this global economic security strategy. I can't, I just have to pay attention to this combination of the word economy and security. So it's not only about prosperity or growth. The assumption is that there is a challenge to economic security. So can I ask you to give us a bit more details about that?
Yeah. And one of the things that was clear, and a number of the senators said at my Senate confirmation, is that the reality of the time we're in is increasing cyber warfare and seemingly ceaseless variations of intense, even weaponized economic competition. And those rivals are playing the long game. And a game of four-dimensional economic, diplomatic, cultural, and military chess. And they're playing for keeps. And with little respect for rule of law, for property, for sovereignty of nations. And they believe they're above the rules. And so with that in mind, if you think about the global economic security strategy, it's really four main pillars. The first one is to further strengthen our relationships with our allies and our friends and take it to the next level and take those trust principles to the next level. That's why I've been spending time in Japan. The second one is leverage the innovation and the resources of the private sector. To me, that's a huge untapped opportunity. The third one is to amplify that moral high ground of these trust values that we share and make them come alive through things like power of entrepreneurship, economic empowerment of women, education. And then the fourth one is really to come together and to take those developing nations really to the next level. And because economic security is national security, right, for both our countries. And there can be no sustainable prosperity without liberty. And so that is the background.
Because I'm not in public office, I have the liberty to use more controversial words, actually. Commitment to rules, and economic security, and all these leads to one area that we share interest, and you've been waiting for this. The big elephant in the room is China. And China is a source of grave anxiety for many Japanese. It also represents a large opportunity. You can't think of a Japanese economy without the Chinese economy. The two economies are pretty much integrated. The thing is that China is growing so rapidly. So in the 1980s or 90s, Japan was leading Chinese economy And that order is just reversed. The Chinese are in a more dominant position in terms of power relations. And frankly, and this would be a rather undiplomatic thing to do, to say, but whenever there is a change in the distribution of power in international relations, that causes possibility for instability, alarms about security, and that further add to this, that China is not only an economic power, it's a military power. And then geopolitically, there has been conflicts between not only Japan, but the Philippines, Vietnam over territories. And there's been a long list or laundry list of disputes. And at the same time, we can't separate ourselves from China. China is our neighbor. So this is a rather contentious issue, but I wonder if you could give us some thoughts about this big nation.
Yeah. Well, one thing I have to say is that the United States enabled it, invited them into the WTO. We really believe that capitalism would equal democracy. We really believed that they would honor their agreements. So in many ways, we enabled that. And what has happened is, it's interesting. They've taken a lot of your industries, focused on, came back, and I see that all over the world. I've had about 42 bilaterals where I'm meeting with a foreign minister or a finance minister or economic minister, and they all have these horror stories of some intellectual property theft or debt diplomacy or something like that. And everybody's afraid to speak up. And I was just over in Korea. They saw that in 2017 with the THAAD missiles, right? Guy who lives right downstairs from me is the ambassador to Norway. They had a Chinese dissident got a prize. They cut him off for 6 years. We see it everywhere. And by the way, big one, recent, was in the NBA, the National Basketball Association. This really hit home with a lot of U.S. citizens, where a 7-word tweet from a general manager of the Houston Rockets in support of what's going on in Hong Kong, within 24 hours, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of sponsorships to players, to teams, were dropped from China-owned apparel companies. And that's a playbook of retaliation. And so I called up the CEO. It's like, hey, because China said you have to fire the general manager of the Houston Rockets, and you have to issue an apology. And here's exactly the wording. And he held his ground. And we're seeing that everywhere. People are afraid to speak up because they have a playbook of retaliation, manipulation. It's interesting. I was over in Germany a few weeks ago, and I had a 25-person roundtable with CEOs of German companies. It went about 5 hours, and they go, we've kind of studied China's economic warcraft doctrine, and it's from the Warring States 3,000 years ago, like Sun Tzu. If you're strong, act weak. If you're weak, act strong. Highest paid guy in the army is a spy. And there's also a concept of a parasitic relationship. Because, first they did Russia, then the U.S., and they've done some Japan, even more. Now they're in Germany. And they bought their number one robotics company, KUKA, which we had a lot of respect for, at General Motors and Fanuc. They snuck up on them and owned 20% of Daimler-Benz. Have a seat on board. And we're just seeing this everywhere. And I think one of the core things the question is, okay, well, what should countries like Japan and the United States do? By the way, I really believe there's strength in power and unity. And I think CEOs should unite because everybody knows about it. And, the reason why I went to Washington in the first place, sure, I didn't know I was going to be asked for a job. But it was because and the first time I went to China was in '82. And, but this last time I went, DocuSign, because we're going on a listening trip. And we heard from Politburo members. We saw their technology. We had the company come up to us. Oh, let's do a joint venture. We're hooked up with the government. And so about a week later, I said, I wonder if the guys in Washington know this. And by the way, now that I am in Washington, and you can see a lot more things, a lot clearly, it's way worse than I ever imagined. And they are coming after the country of Japan. There's no doubt about that. So I think there's strength in unity and solidarity.
A long time ago, quite a few Japanese believed that strengthening economic relationship with China would change China to a more open society, would change the political structure of China. And that was the belief that led the development aid policy from Japan to China. And if I'm not mistaken, this was also a policy, especially under the Clinton administration, usually called engagement policy, that you strengthen relationship with China, bear hug China, and that would change Chinese institutions. And in fact, trade did expand, investment did expand, but there are doubts whether the engagement policy has been successful. How would you think about the engagement policy?
By the way, I think that our president, President Trump, has been the catalyst for calling it out. And really woke everybody up. And I love what Secretary Pompeo says on this subject. He goes, we have to treat the China not how we wish it would be, but how it is. And by the way, make no mistake about it. It's not about the Chinese people. I mean, I have deep affection for the Chinese people. I mean, Silicon Valley, work side by side. But it's the government and the Communist Party and the PLA, which is all one and the same. And yeah, I think everybody's beginning to wake up, some faster than others. But they can't retaliate against the world. That's how I look at it.
That leads us to yet another question. If engagement policy may not bring about desired changes in China, then, well, what can be the right solution? So I have a question for you. It's not a question I can't answer, but actually I have the luxury of asking questions. What would be an ideal world, ideal relationship between U.S. and China? In particular, do you think the Chinese Communist Party will have to go away for a good relationship between U.S. and China? Do you think military conflicts are inescapable in the transition to a better relationship between U.S. and China? And for that matter, what kind of institutions, partnership may include China in a positive manner? For there are doubts about their role in multilateral institutions. And well, and it has been voiced quite openly. What would be the right way? So an ideal world, your view.
Yeah, well, I think the ideal world, and we want China to prosper, but they have to reform. And by the way, they talk about reform, But when they talk about it, it means is increase their productivity and innovation. We mean from a trust standpoint. And so, really what is required is really a global trust network of countries, companies, universities, nonprofits, organizations that operate under global trust standards. And it's not just, physical infrastructure or digital infrastructure. It's everything. It's investment, it's trade, it's money flows, it's supply chains. And if China can prove they can be trusted, then great. We just say we want them to honor the agreements they already made. So we won't stop trying. But that's why you can see the United States, I think the rest of the other countries, putting such a premium on enforcement because we've been made promises. And, big thing, that's what I love, fair, free, and reciprocal. I mean, our ideal, President Trump said it many times, the ideal is no tariffs, no subsidies, but the idea of reciprocity and honoring things like rule of law, I mean, I think they're paramount.
In other words, if they keep their promises and implement what they have agreed upon, that would be an ideal relationship between U.S. and China.
Yeah, and by the way, here's an example, because we really enabled this when we invited him to the WTO. They have developing nation status. So, so many of these special loans from international organizations and all that. I mean, United States citizens, United States bondholders have financed the One Belt, One-Way Road to Beijing. We want them to honor those agreements.
And this also means that you're pretty happy in working with China, with the Communist Party, ruling the government, so long as they honor their agreements. I just want to make sure about that.
Say that one more time.
If the Chinese government honor the agreements and implement what they have agreed upon with the United States, and for that matter, for other nations, then you would be happy to work with the Chinese government, even if it is ruled by the Communist Party, with the People's Liberation Army virtually intact with the Chinese state.
Yeah, I mean, we respect sovereignty of nations. So, but they have to be trusted, right? And the tip of the spear is the trade issue, right? And whatever comes out of that is going to be the benefit of all nations. I think that's really a big point.
And how would you think about the connection between geopolitical challenges posed by China and the economic challenges that is posed by this major economic power, which may not honor international rules?
Yeah, I mean, so in China, they have a law that you have to turn over any information, proprietary technology, intellectual property, or data to the Chinese party, to the government, PLA, which is all one and the same, for any company, state-owned enterprise, and any citizen has to do upon command. So if you look at that, that's pretty scary. And it doesn't allow for a lot of trust. And I think you're seeing it here in Japan. I know you see in the U.S. It's really being seen around the world. And by the way, I really appreciate you asking the question, because it's a question people are afraid of, and taking that developing nation status. And Yeah, and by the way, being over in Korea, where they just said, we're not going to do the developing nation status. I mean, that's like bold leadership. It's tough for them to do domestically, but maybe that sets an example for them.
I've been discussing too much about China here. So let's move on to Japan, where we are. And this is about trade relationship between the United States and Japan. Can you share with us some your thinking, your thoughts about U.S.-Japan trade agreements, the status as it stands right now? And frankly, I do have an impression that the U.S. government right now tend to focus more on bilateral transaction and engagement between two countries rather than multilateral engagement or multilateral institutions, which is something quite against my discipline, because after all, my background is international politics, and we have a rosy picture about multilateral institutions. It's not working in that direction. So could you share with us your thought about U.S.-Japan trade relationship?
Well, by the way, I think what we just signed in October is great. I mean, these are two great nations that are doing a lot of things together. So I was just at the Indo-Pacific ASEAN conference down in Bangkok, for example. And here's some of the things that we're doing with the country of Japan. I mean, first of all, a great thing about the ASEAN countries is this is a great market for Japanese products. It's also a great alternative to China for production capacity. And the objective is really to increase their development. And so we did three things down there. It was in energy, infrastructure, and digital. And signed JCEP, which is, or JUCEP. It's Japan, U.S. Strategic Energy Partnership. It was a $10 billion deal. We signed it with Terazawa-san. And then also formed in the infrastructure area, the Blue Dot Network. We announced that it actually operates under those trusted standards. And the U.S., we doubled the amount of money available, $60 billion. And also, it doesn't have to be a U.S. nexus. In other words, it could be a Japanese-led initiative. And then also in the digital area, we have our digital cooperation agreement. And so these things are doing good for the world.
Assume that there is not going to be any new tariffs imposed upon Japanese auto production.
Well, I'm not in charge of trade. Look, the Japanese automotive business is great. And by the way, the cars that you build in the United States is a lot. They're super high quality. So I have deep admiration for the Japanese automotive business. Even a guy who grew up and got his education paid for by General Motors.
Ours was not a GM, but it was a Honda car manufactured in the United States, and it was as good, if not better, than Honda made in Japan. So we do have a multilateral trade world, and I think it has added a great deal to the prosperity of both nations.
Yeah, and by the way, at the ASEAN conference, our Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, he said, look, our relationship with Japan, European Union, Korea is great. So he's kind of optimistic. But, I'm not authorized.
Sir, then why not TPP? This is about a friendly group of nations that share common values, an open economy, and working on more liberalized trade. This is not about China, for China is not a member of the TPP proposal. You have to tell me why the United States had to pull out of the TPP agreements.
well, the president's made that decision. And, I think there were a few things about it that just didn't sit right. So that's why we're so focused on the multilateral things we're doing, like in ASEAN, and also in terms of building a global trust network with global trust standards.
Okay, and your responsibility includes not only economic growth, but energy and environment. What would be your future for U.S. policy on energy and environment?
Yeah, well, I think it's in good shape, and what I mean by that is we're getting great results. We're the world leader in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of innovation. I mean, clean tech is and innovation is the future. If you look at since 2007, the United States economy has grown by 25%, and carbon emissions have been reduced by 19%. So we're focused on results, and not only developing those industries, but also helping countries abroad. I mean, until I moved to Washington, I was in San Francisco. 1/3 of the pollution in San Francisco comes from China. They burn 10 times as much coal as we do. And we have the fortune of energy abundance, and energy security is also economic security.
When it comes to energy and environment, it's not only about cutting CO2 emissions. This is also about securing new forms of energy supplies.
Absolutely. And when we look at a healthy planet, it's on multi-dimensions. So also 2 weeks ago, I was in Norway at the E Before Me Created the Oceans conference. And I had an announcement where United States commits $1.2 billion to the blue economy in terms of marine plastics, and also in terms of unregulated, unreported illegal fishing. And so there's so many different things that we're doing, and like the team in the State Department in that area. I mean, these are some of the world's best, and this is really a global thing, an international thing. My daughter's a top marine biologist back in California, so I can tell you, she makes me recycle.
You recycle. That's a wonderful line, and one of my favorite pictures where the prosecutor asked, witness was it, do you recycle? And the witness shrinks really. That's a scary question, but you do recycle.
By the way, you know what's funny? So she goes, "Dad, are you for the environment?" I go, "No, I'm against it." Anyway, that's just funny. I said, "I'm kidding you." She didn't laugh either.
My recycling comes from my family backgrounds, because family members wouldn't allow my not recycling, but that's another matter. You did mention about the importance of innovation. Now, when you see the connection between economic growth and innovation, what would be the 3 key areas where there should be more innovation in the future to promote economic growth?
Economic growth. And by the way, I think this is really relevant to Japan, especially because of your demographics are shifting, right? You have such a huge population that is over the age of 65. And this generation was the one who sacrificed it all after the war. And, I mean, went from 25 years devastated to the number 2 economy in the world. I mean, that stuff doesn't happen by accident. And you got to take care of them. So, the 3 things I always say is, and the biggest lever, is true in so many, is economic empowerment of women. I mean, you tap into that in the country of Japan, it's absolutely huge. And it's interesting because Japan changed the laws for DocuSign. We created the digital hanko with Shasihata. They're the manufacturer of the hankos here in Japan. And one of the people who helped us get through Parliament, this great woman, and I can't remember her name right now. She might, I mean, my eyes, she's young, but she could be Prime Minister of Japan someday. And she was the one who really educated me on that. It's like economic empowerment of women and bringing women in the workforce and enabling them also to work from home, during the child. And I know you guys are doing many, many things on that. That's another area of partnership between our two countries. The other one, and by the way, the chairman of Japan Post told me this when we came over in the early days at DocuSign and told me about the aging population. He goes, look, it's all about productivity. And he goes, we've robotized our factories, you know about that. But our office productivity is horrible. We have the second largest amount of paper than any other country in the world. And so I think office productivity is a big area of opportunity. And, and NTT and Mitsui were investors in DocuSign. They did a lot of great things. So, and it was about 3 years ago, we put on a big thing with the Japanese government and CEOs in terms of accelerating Japan's digital transformation. So I think that's an area of increasing productivity. And then, of course, the third one is innovation, because the intellectual human capital in Japan is incredible. And you have such an industrious spirit. You have entrepreneurial drive, a great education system, thanks to University of Tokyo, and professors at University of Tokyo, that I really think, that's the thing. And Japan always will be a great country. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank the professor for his leadership and inviting me here, and your hospitality. All my years coming to Japan, this is my first time I actually got to step foot here in this university. So many guys that I've worked with. So in honor of that, professor, I'm going to make you an honorary member of the United States State Department. I just happen to have in my pocket this coin, United States State Department. So you are now a member of the E, and 4 stars. You're a 4-star general in the United States State Department.